Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sam Appel. I am the California State Manager for the BlueGreen Alliance. We're here today to launch an important bill, AB 794, authored by Assemblymember Wendy Carillo, who's here with us. And we're with a deep and diverse alliance of environmental, labor, environmental justice, and equity allies today. Before we do that, though, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the deep suffering, anger, and pain that those in our community and Black folks particularly may be feeling with the close of the trial of George Floyd's murderer yesterday. We'll conclude on this by saying, George Floyd, may you rest in power, and let's all work towards a future in which social systems affirm that Black lives truly matter. On that note, we transition to AB 794. AB 794 aims to transform our clean vehicle incentives into true engines for economic recovery and growth of high-quality jobs for disadvantaged workers, dislocated workers, and low-income workers of color in California. AB 794 also aims to remove key adoption barriers to the rollout of zero-emission vehicles. Today, we'll hear from several speakers, including Assemblymember Carillo, union members from auto manufacturing and truck driving unions, and representatives of environmental groups. AB 794 would be one visionary step towards ensuring economic justice in our transition to clean vehicles, and the stakes could not be higher in that transition. Over 1 million jobs in the auto manufacturing sector could be demolished in this transition. These are towns, regions, whole communities, and families that will be affected. Extreme exploitation of truck drivers could also be perpetuated, and progress on clean vehicle adoption could be slowed by exploitative business models in the trucking industry. Our speakers today will lay out a common sense vision for the future of low carbon transportation that reflects the diversity of our labor, EJ, and Enviro coalition. This webinar will be recorded, and the first up to speak will be Assemblywoman Carillo, representing California's 51st Assembly District in Central LA and the author of AB 794. Over to you.
Like all things, I was on mute, so thank you for that. Good morning. My name is Wendy Carillo. I'm proud to represent Assembly District 51, which includes the communities of Northeast LA and East Los Angeles, and I'm also proud to be the author of AB 794, the Climate, Jobs, and Equity Act. For a long time, I've said that mitigating the impacts of climate change means fighting for a healthy economy and lifting up workers and communities that have been disproportionately impacted by unsustainable practices. We need long-term, equitable, and sustainable solutions with economic development strategies to build back better for the COVID-19 pandemic and address systemic racism and economic justice. AB 794 shows how to do this with two iconic American industries, truck driving and auto manufacturing. AB 794 will get us to zero emission vehicles and secure compliance with labor laws, high road workplace standards, create jobs for many of those who need them the most, and address climate and equity issues in our local communities. California's vehicle incentive programs function like a gate. Vehicles enter the gate and trucking companies drive them out. AB 794 sets baseline standards for company performance on treatment of workers, domestic manufacturing, and hiring disadvantaged workers for a manufacturer to send a vehicle through the gate and trucking companies to drive trucks out of the gate. The bill encourages manufacturers to produce vehicles using state or federal apprenticeship programs and provides a blueprint on how they can expect to operate or deliver employment training that provides essential workplace skills in a growing clean energy sector. The manufacturing side of the bill includes 5 baselines workforce standards. There are legal compliance in the states where factories operate, domestic production of vehicles, domestic production of parts, industry competitive pay or wages, industry standard training beyond what's provided, hiring of disadvantaged workers, and a preservation of dispute resolution options for employees. The trucking side of the bill simply requires that trucking companies demonstrate current compliance with state labor, employment, and health and safety laws. The bottom line is this: California should not subsidize companies that violate workers' rights or shift the cost of going green onto the backs of workers or the state safety net. Public funding should reward companies that follow the law and respect workers, because experience has shown us that these policies and incentive programs to upgrade fleets without labor standards do not work. The misclassification of port drayage truck drivers, for instance, has been an obstacle to meeting climate change action goals and ensuring California Air Resource Board air quality targets are met, because misclassified drivers have been unlawfully forced to bear all the costs of transitioning to clean trucks. Medium and heavy duty trucks and buses are a major source of air pollution in California, responsible for about 35% of statewide nitrogen oxide emissions and approximately 26% of total statewide diesel particulate matter emissions. Those who work in our ports and the Californians along transportation routes disproportionately bear the health impacts of diesel emissions, including the very families of drivers, especially those who are misclassified. It has been extensively documented and known for years that Black and Brown children with both US born and immigrant parents who live in low income communities by transportation routes develop higher rates of asthma and other respiratory problems. I grew up in a neighborhood with poor air quality. My little sister developed asthma, and we almost lost her when she was a little girl, and this is very personal to me. The 51st Assembly District is surrounded by the 5, the 10, the 60, the 710, the 2, the 134, and the 110 freeway. This is a very real issue in my community, just as it is an incredibly real issue across the state of California. AB 794 delivers a cleaner, healthier, and more equitable present and builds towards a future aligned with the pillars of the Green New Deal. The COVID-19 global pandemic has laid inequities for all of us to see, and we need to do the work now that is necessary to ensure that we are building a California for all, not just a California for some. This is our moment to act. And if we are truly going to achieve our climate change goals, we need to ensure that workers are at the forefront of that conversation, and that a just transition is real, and that we're putting the values of our budget, the values of any incentives into that transition to ensure that we're actually following the pillars that have been set before us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Romeo Torres. He is the chairman for the United Auto Workers in the Ontario Ports Department in Southern California.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, my name is Romeo Torres, and I work for Ford Motor Company. I am the United Auto Workers chairman for the Ontario HVC. We're a parts distribution center servicing Southern California. I have more than 2 decades with Ford Motor Company, 13 of those serving as the UAW representative for the membership at the Parts Depot. I know firsthand what it is to have job stability, a safe workplace, excellent healthcare, and a living wage. I'm here to talk about why the United Auto Workers supports AB 794. California gives auto manufacturers millions of dollars every year to help get more zero emissions vehicles on the road. Governor Newsom has announced that all new vehicles sold in California must be zero emissions by 2035. The UAW supports California's battle against climate change, and getting more zero emissions vehicles into our community is a big part of that fight. Under the current law, manufacturers receive taxpayers' dollars for electric vehicles, but don't have to meet any requirements for creating jobs in California or the US. This bill would help support US jobs creation and support quality jobs so workers can support their families. California is the largest electric vehicle market in the United States. The message that California sends to the auto industry matters. The United Auto Workers have been keeping a close watch and gathering data on electric vehicles due to the drastic change electric vehicles will have on the auto industry, and preparing for not only the effects, but the opportunities these changes will create. AB 794 is a blueprint not only for California, but for the working class throughout the United States. That's why, along with our brothers and sisters from the Teamsters, BlueGreen Alliance, and other environmental organizations, the United Auto Workers is urging legislators to stand up for quality U.S. manufacturing jobs. AB 794 will incentivize auto manufacturers to bring jobs back to the U.S. to build components, batteries, and do final assembly of zero-emission vehicles. The bill will also incentivize vehicle manufacturers to pay their workers a better wage and provide good benefits, and to make sure that their workers have job security. Finally, we stand with our Teamster brothers and sisters in fighting to fix driver misclassification, which hurts workers and hurts communities affected by pollution. Putting more electric vehicles on the road and building electric vehicles in the US are two important priorities. These goals aren't in conflict with one another, and with California leading the way, we can build an auto industry that raises up the working class, making the vehicles that will protect the future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Romeo, and thanks for your leadership. Next, we will turn over to Simon Mui. He's the Deputy Director for Climate and Clean Energy at the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Well, it's an honor to join all of you, as well as Assemblywoman Wendy Carillo, together with our labor partners and BlueGreen Alliance and our environmental justice partners to support AB 794. As Sam has said, I've worked here at NRDC for the past 12 years, but really for the past 20 years, trying to reduce pollution burdens across the US, including here in my home state of California. The climate investments are essential to California's economic, climate change, and environmental justice strategies to succeed, and for the state to come out of the COVID-19 crisis downturn in a better place. While my colleagues and I are working to really protect the public health of communities, the lungs of our kids and our parents alike, by protecting the air we breathe and protecting the climate we live in, we also see the critical importance of joining together, right, to work on improving lives across California by increasing the number of good high-road jobs and working together to address the inequities around worker rights across the state and elsewhere. There's a unique opportunity here to really transition to a clean energy economy in a manner that simultaneously makes progress on jobs and equity alike. And that's why the Climate Jobs and Equity Act, AB 794, is trying to move the ball on all three at once to ensure that these state funding programs for clean vehicles really becomes a true engine, right? A true engine for economic recovery and growth in high quality jobs and to benefit disadvantaged workers. As Assemblymember Carillo said, if you don't do that, you end up with unintended consequences, potential loopholes. If truck fleets are able to simply shift compliance by misclassifying workers as independent contractors, then those workers bear the cost, right, of that transition to zero emission vehicles as well. What ends up happening is also an environmental issue because zero emission trucks don't get purchased and dirty polluting vehicles end up staying on the road. So this is a critical issue the state needs to tackle. And just to take a little bit of a step back, today's conversation around making progress on all three isn't just a California conversation, it's a national conversation. And it's actually an international conversation that is also playing out in Europe and in Asia even, as countries get ready for this transformational shift of zero emissions mobility, and as hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested globally. President Biden recently announced as part of the American Jobs Plan, a proposal to invest $174 billion in domestic electric vehicle manufacturing and charging infrastructure. And with Earth Day tomorrow, the reports are that the administration will likely announce in the US that it will commit to a 50% reduction in climate pollution by 2030. So here in California, we really have a unique and historic opportunity to show the country and the world how California can do this successfully, right? By making progress not only on growing clean energy, but also growing our domestic jobs and ensuring improved equity and worker outcomes while we're putting zero emission vehicles on the road. You know, if we can't do it, who is going to do it? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for your thoughtful remarks. Next, we'll turn it over to Rob Naughtov, the Policy Director for the Los Angeles Federation of Labor.
Great, thank you, Sam, and thank you everybody for joining this morning. Before I dive into my comments, on behalf of the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, we'd like to thank Assemblymember Carillo for her foresight, her vision and leadership in bringing forth AB 794, which sets a foundation for how incentivizing green technologies can result in good high road jobs. You've already heard from the other speakers how AB 794 can create good jobs in manufacturing and production, but I'd like to specifically talk about how AB 794 can help to transform our essential trucking industry into one that meets California's ambitious environmental goals, while also raising the floor on employment practices. As we know, goods that come through California's ports touch every single county in the nation, and port truck drivers play a huge role in making the supply chain work. Port trucks are also a major source of emissions, and with the ever-increasing demand of goods movement and the increase in imports, the ability of the state to meet its climate goals depends in large part on trucking companies transitioning to zero-emission fleets. So therein lies the challenge and the opportunity at hand. How can we expedite the transition in a just way that raises standards for all? The genius of AB 794 is it seeks to utilize the power of public funds to incentivize the transition to zero-emissions fleets while raising the bar on working conditions for port truck drivers. And here's why that's important. Port truck drivers are overwhelmingly workers of color. And in California, approximately 2/3 of port truckers are estimated to be misclassified as independent contractors. And for those who are unaware of what misclassification is, it's the concept of illegally denying an employee access to minimal employment standards like a minimum wage, sick days, workers' comp by falsely labeling an employee as an independent contractor. And when employees are misclassified as independent contractors, it allows a business to dump the costs of employment onto the backs of its workers. And as independent contractors, workers become responsible for picking up the tab for their own healthcare and other employment costs. And in the case of truckers, drivers are responsible for the cost of their truck, their fuel and gas, and other costly maintenance and upkeep that results in them at times making less than minimum wage. For example, we've seen drivers bring home paychecks where they actually owe the company after working 80 hours in a full-time shift due to the associated costs with misclassification. And in essence, the way that we see it, misclassification is modern day indentured servitude. It's criminal, and it's resulted in unimaginable working conditions for these essential drivers. And since driver misclassification results in low wages, it also serves to stall progress on clean air and climate goals because misclassified drivers simply can't afford new or clean electric trucks, nor can they afford the required maintenance and upkeep of their vehicles. And though current law prohibits misclassification of workers, many companies have simply been turning a blind eye to it as enforcement has fallen woefully short. There are over 500 cases where courts and state agencies have ruled in favor of drivers that they are in fact being illegally misclassified, yet it's notoriously difficult to collect from employers as they simply drag out the process in appeals courts, they refuse to comply, or they simply pay the fine, chalk it up to the cost of doing business, and begin misclassifying all over again. It's arguably cheaper to misclassify and risk paying the fines than it is to pay drivers what they're rightfully owed, and that's simply a model that we can't afford. So as you can see, misclass of port truck drivers is a labor issue and an environmental issue. And if California wants to meet its climate goals, it's imperative that we address the issue of misclass. And AB 794 seeks to do just that. It will help to reduce misclassification of California's truck drivers by requiring that fleet purchasers comply with the laws before being eligible for public CARB subsidies that they're going to use to then purchase clean fleet vehicles. And attaching standards to public subsidies can begin to shift the business model in trucking from one of indentured servitude and a lack of climate compliance to high road jobs and with clean vehicles. And finally, AB 794 will also level the playing field for high road companies who are complying with the law and treating their workers fairly. The premise is pretty simple. State investments should never undermine companies that compete fairly, and AB 794 will further direct CARB to focus investment in high road, law-abiding companies. So in closing, if we're truly serious about creating an equitable future where we can all breathe clean air, reward high road companies, and enjoy dignified wages, then the choice is clear. We have to pass AB 794. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Rob, and for your leadership. With that, we will open the floor to questions, and I'll leave the floor open for half a minute to see if there are any questions that anyone wants to raise. And then I will turn over to some written questions that we received. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn to a question that we have received before on this bill, which is this bill aimed at specific companies, perhaps Tesla? Is there anyone who'd like to take that question? And I refer that to Thomas Hensey.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. Hi, everyone. Tom Hensey with the United Auto Workers. This bill is about making sure that California public dollars reward high road employers. And as Assemblymember Carillo said in the beginning, public funding should reward companies that follow the law and that respect workers. Compliance with state law promotes fair competition, and it ensures that manufacturers are meeting the standards that have already been set by lawmakers. Manufacturers that try to cut costs by cutting compliance are gaining an unfair and illegal advantage. So, the answer is no, it's not targeting anyone. It's making sure that the playing field is even for all companies that receive funds from the state.
Great. With that, we'll turn to another frequently asked question. Will trucking independent owner operators be responsible for footing the bill for upgrades under AB 794? And I'll send this one to Rob, or Sarah for that matter.
We'll let Sarah take it.
Okay.
Sorry, could you repeat that question again?
Absolutely.
So I make sure I get it totally right.
Sure. Will independent owner operators in the trucking industry be responsible for footing the bill for upgrades for CARB regulations under AB 794?
So the idea behind AB 794 is that it requires trucking companies to follow existing law and be fleet purchasers. So independent contractors would not, the independent owner operators would not be responsible for any of the upgrades, that it would be fleet purchasers, the trucking companies, who would be responsible, and they would be the ones receiving the incentive as well. As we heard from Rob, the misclassified port drivers are not in a position to be able to transition to zero emissions vehicles with the wages that they are receiving. So this bill would support and really make it easier to transition to zero emissions vehicles at the port, because it would be the responsibility of trucking companies. However, this does say if you are a legitimate independent contractor, if you are a legitimate owner operator of your own trucking company, it doesn't change your business model at all. You are still eligible for the incentives as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And on that note, some have asked, how exactly does this bill work? What are the actual effective mechanisms in this bill that do what the panelists say the bill will do? And I'll refer this one to you as well, Sarah.
So this is, the model of the bill is rather simple. It basically says CARB has millions and millions of public dollars at its disposal that it is giving out as subsidies or incentives to companies so that they can transition to clean vehicles and meet the state's climate goals. AB 794 ensures that the state of California can meet climate goals while at the same time creating a more just economy and high road jobs in the state. And it does that by saying, okay, company, if you're going to receive these public dollars, you're going to have to meet certain workforce standards in order to be eligible to get the incentive. And that's really all it says. It's not at all a new concept. This is something that's in tax credits like the film tax credit. It's something that's in programs like the California Competes tax credit, where companies have to show that they're creating jobs at a certain wage level in order to be eligible for public dollars. And AB 794 takes the same concept and attaches those standards to money that's coming through CARB.
Excellent. Another question here. Your bill, oh, well, we're getting another. AB 794 calls for EV batteries to be made here in the US. Do you support efforts to increase mining for lithium and other rare earth metals in the US and California to meet this demand? What about the environmental impact to that? For that, I will call up Tom as well. Tom again.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we want to make sure that EV batteries get produced in the US. That's another way for us to level the playing field. And as Romeo stated, to create new jobs. You know, we however want to make sure that, you know, lithium that's mined in California, which could also create jobs for working people, is done in a way that is environmentally sustainable. So, you know, like the purpose of this bill, we don't think that job creation and environmental priorities are in conflict. In fact, we want to make sure that both can happen at the same time.
If I may add to that as well, the majority of lithium is being produced and actually extracted out of Chile. And the major buyer for lithium is China. So if American manufacturing and American made is our priority to ensure that Americans are and American workers are at the forefront of the conversation on climate change and the future of our EV automobile manufacturing, it is a legitimate question to ask in terms of how can we do everything that we envision? How can we ensure that we're meeting our climate change goals? How can we ensure that we are environmentally sound? How can we ensure that we're putting people to work in wages that are sustainable long-term? A just transition is hard. And these are incredibly difficult conversations to have because we are turning a corner in what this could potentially look like for California and for the rest of the nation. There is a lot of conversation in terms of what this can be and how can we reimagine you know, a new world in which all of these complicated questions really need answers. And the next phase that we also have to think about is the recyclability of these batteries. And so that, you know, when we think about the environment and we think about, you know, landfills, right now, we don't necessarily have a real solution for the recycling of the batteries. And so that's like a next step that needs to happen. And part of the conversation about planning and ensuring that when we think about climate change goals, that we're thinking about our supply and demand, American manufacturing, and ultimately recycling in terms of ensuring that what we are creating isn't also harmful to the environment.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Finally, if there are no other questions, we'll refer out the question of how much is this bill going to cost taxpayers? Is there a cost to this bill? And to that, I will turn it to Sarah Fox yet again.
I would actually say that this bill would be a net gain for taxpayers. Right now, there's already public dollars that are going out the door to help us transition to the clean vehicles. This bill, AB 794, says, let's put some high road, high quality job standards on it. Let's create some jobs that actually pay a living wage so that workers at the port aren't forced to depend on public benefit programs like Medi-Cal and food stamps. It's saying that for manufacturing, we should make sure that workers are in conditions where health and safety standards are met, so they're not being injured and then having to go into the workers' comp system. What it's really saying is that when our public subsidies, when public dollars go out the door, there should be a return on investment to taxpayers. It shouldn't be that we're giving it to companies who then create poverty wage jobs that then workers have to turn to the safety net. So I would say that this doesn't cost taxpayers anything. It actually increases their investment. And I think this AB 794, Assemblywoman Carillo's bill, is really a model for all of the other programs in the state, whether it's tax breaks, incentives, or public procurement programs. And so I just wanted to say thank you to the Assemblywoman for authoring this bill.
Yeah, we really are all very grateful for the Assembly members' leadership and vision with this bill, and commitment to this coalition and so many diverse causes that we're trying to elevate here. And with that, I want to ask the Assembly member, you mentioned earlier that you live and represent freight communities that are impacted by freight. How will this bill help working class people in EJ communities in your district?
Well, thank you for the question. As I mentioned, my community, my district is surrounded by several different freeways that have often, for a long time, contaminated our air quality. So working class communities will benefit automatically from just cleaner transportation in general. But the fact is that the trucks coming out of the ports of San Pedro or Los Angeles that go across the nation travel through my community. They travel through our freeways. They go to warehouses in the Inland Empire. And so EJ communities that have been impacted by low quality air standards will benefit. The workers of our communities that are employed and do this work and actually this is what they do for a living will also benefit. The American and California public will benefit at the same time while we establish ways that we create the tools and resources necessary to ensure that public dollars are going toward public goods, and that we are actually, in fact, doing a just transition of workforce where dignity as well as misclassification is addressed, and that drivers are able to take breaks and have a retirement plan and have benefits, and the manufacturing industry can return to the United States, can return to California, and really just create a different type of growth and a new model in which we can look at our climate change goals as a reality and something real that actually needs tangible solutions and tangible ways to get things done. These, again, as I mentioned earlier, are hard conversations, but necessary conversations to ensure that ultimately, as we develop and really reach our goals for climate change, it's not just simply about reaching those goals, but it's about putting people first, ensuring that workers are able to pay their rent or achieve the American dream of home ownership and sending their kids to college and putting food on the table, and that one job should be enough and you shouldn't owe money back to an industry that doesn't take care of you to begin with. And so if we're using public dollars, they should go towards the vision of the public, which is to ensure a just transition, to ensure worker protections and safety, to ensure that we put people first, and that we achieve our climate change goals. To me, it's pretty basic. It's pretty simple. It makes sense to me. Now it's just a matter of trying to ensure that we can move the bill forward and have buy-in and ensure that we are actually reaching pillars of the Green New Deal in a way that is just, that is equitable, and that puts people first.
Thank you so much again for your leadership, Assembly member. And with that, and also I just want to throw out there, misclassification is a huge issue across so many dimensions of our economy, including other trucking areas in construction, dairy, bakery, and other sectors. And that's just an important point that as we move forward, this bill is making an important impact. And finally, we just want to wrap it up at this point, and thank our panelists for their leadership and their time today. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to following up with you later on any questions you may have for our panelists. Thank you, Assemblymember Carillo. Thank you everyone who could make it, and we'll talk to you soon.